Great accomplishments. Great things. How great He is. We've been together sharing an overall mission, if you will. What does it mean to living in the kingdom of heaven, eternity today? We've had a journey so far. The definition in which we've been using concerning the kingdom of heaven is that the kingdom of heaven is Jesus having authority to exercise His will over all other kingdoms, including our own. He's the king over the kingdom. Jesus makes the kingdom of heaven as He comes into this world. He causes the kingdom of heaven to be available to anyone that would turn into it. In fact, this first sermon was this: repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. And everything that Jesus did displayed that kingdom, that future age to come. And so we live there between this present evil age and the age to come. That's where we live. That evil age still affects our lives. And yet we choose to follow Jesus and to live the kingdom of heaven life. We become citizens of that kingdom by birth and adoption. The only way that you can be part of the kingdom of heaven is to be born again or born from above. And then it's God who chose us and picked us out. But we have a choice to make. Am I going to live my life as a disciple, a follower of Jesus, an apprentice of Jesus, in living this kingdom life? To follow Jesus and discipleship means is the call to change. Because the kingdom of heaven is available to everyone who will turn into it, it means we change. We can't remain the same what we once were. And that relationship with Jesus becomes the foundation of our life. So when the stuff happens, the storms come, it's the relationship with Jesus that becomes foundational to our life. So that brings us, we're moving to the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And that is the Beatitudes today. But let's talk about it. First off, there's several ways in which the Sermon on the Mount has been, applied or taught or interpreted. The first one is that the sermon itself is for the future. It's for that age to come. So the only way of practicing or doing it will be in the age to come when Jesus comes back. That's one way to look at it. Except those that would say it's for a future age still pull some things out of the sermon, like dealing with divorce, dealing with forgiveness. But it's for another time. The second way in which it's approached is that this sermon is for now. And if I'm going to make it into the kingdom of heaven, I must practice it perfectly in order to make it. In other words, it's treating the teachings of Jesus and practicing of the Sermon on the Mount in order to earn the spot or the place in the kingdom of heaven. And that's how they look at it. That's exactly what how the Pharisees looked at the law. Jesus says in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 5, verse 20, he says this concerning the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. The righteousness of the Pharisees was about performance. I'm going to do everything I can in my actions to obey the law, and I'll even come up with some new ways in which it'll help me or not help me to be obedient to the law. And so I perform, I will act, and if I do it perfectly enough, then my righteousness is seen everywhere. And God's going to declare me righteous. That's the Pharisees. And Jesus says, no. Unless your righteousness exceeds that, you're not even entering the kingdom of heaven. The third way in which these verses, this teaching of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, is used, yes, it's to be practiced now. We got that from the parable last week we talked about. It's for now, but this practicing means it's in relationship with Jesus and not a life apart from Him. You see, this practicing that we are called to do, and I believe from the parable, I'll read it again for you. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house upon the rock. And the rains came down, and the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it did not fall, because it was on the foundation, the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. The rains came, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against that house, and it fell with great crash. In other words, I really believe from this statement of Jesus, this parable of Jesus, that He intends for every one of us to practice. You get that? Okay. But what do you do with that? You don't want to be like the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, right? We can practice really hard. And we think, well, that'll make us good. That's not what Jesus is saying. You see, it's the relationship that's the foundation with Jesus. And as I live my life, as I practice what He's teaching, our relationship grows closer together. We begin to get changed inwardly. So that brings us to the beginning of the sermon. Beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, it's known as the Beatitudes. You find that in chapter 5, verses 1 to 12. Verses 1 to 12. Now when He saw the crowds, He went up into a mountainside and sat down with His disciples that came to Him. And He began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice. Be glad. Because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So that brings me to a question for you to think about for a moment. Who do you consider blessed? Just think about it. I'll give you a second or two. Who do you consider blessed? And I wrote down a few that maybe you might consider blessed. Those who have possessions or status. And for those of you graduating, you say, well, I graduated. I'm blessed, right? Maybe a comfortable place to live. Blessed? We would say they were people who have a comfortable place to live are blessed, right? Someone who has a job. They're blessed. I don't have one, so there you go. The other person's got one, so they're blessed, right? Having money to keep your bills paid up. That's a blessing, right? People who are able to have food on the table. They either can buy it or some other way have it provided. Some have gardens. They're blessed, right? They have food on the table. People in prominent positions, right? Judges, politicians, business executives. They're blessed because they have this position. When we think about it, in short, anyone in society who's spoken well of, and that they enter the room and they'll get an applause, we think they're blessed, right? We would say these people are blessed. So here's my other, I don't know whether I coined this word or not, but who do you consider unblessable? Okay? And you understand what I mean by that? I don't even know whether it's a real word or not. Unblessable. The way I'm interpreting that is being people who you think would never be blessed in their life. That you would consider unblessable. And maybe some people in your own life. And so think of the crowd in which Jesus is speaking to. Right? Who's in that crowd? He's there, he's sitting down on the hillside, and he's speaking to this group of people. Those that are unblessable, or we would consider unblessable. It's those who have no hope, and may have come to the end of their rope and tied the knot and just hanging on. Those who appear to have nothing to offer the world, at least according to appearances. Those who are on the edge of the religious society, the condemned or the accused by the religious. Those who live the way society would call non-producers. Those who would never consider themselves successful, but failures. They're society's losers. That's in that crowd that Jesus is talking to. Maybe some of you feel that some of that stuff too. Who's unblessable and you consider unblessable? Just these people. There's no way God would bless them. That's the crowd Jesus is talking to. But here's the most amazing thing. What he says about them and the kingdom. because they couldn't believe their ears. Jesus uses this term concerning blessed, right? And this is what that word means. Extremely fortunate, well off, and truly happy. Let me say that again. Extremely fortunate, well off, and truly happy. That's the word in which Jesus says, for instance, blessed are the poor in spirit, those that mourn, those that are meek. He says of them, by this word blessed, that these individuals in the kingdom of heaven are extremely fortunate, well off, and truly happy. So what does that mean, this blessing? It means that Jesus' blessing had nothing to do with where the person was. Right? Where they're at in their life. The blessing of Jesus in the kingdom has nothing to do with where they are. It has nothing to do, it has everything to do about grace. We can understand about grace, right? We talked about a few weeks ago about how do you become part of the kingdom? By being born and being chosen by God. And the thing is, that's all of grace because we can't do that. We can't birth ourselves. So it is with the blessing of God in the kingdom. That blessing comes to the individual who's all those things. Society's losers. Unproductive. Those that tried stuff and failed. And Jesus is saying, you are blessed in the kingdom because it's about a relationship with me. And not about where you're at. That's what it's about. I like this. This is a paraphrase of these by Dallas Willard. You could find it in his book called Divine Conspiracy. And he puts the Beatitudes this way. Even if you are spiritually bankrupt, poor in spirit, even if you are overwhelmed with sadness of life in this world, those who mourn, even if you, the kind of person who doesn't stand for yourself or assert your rights, meek, even if you are fed up with and broken by injustice, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Even if your heart is soft, you are always giving to others and easily takes advantage of by needy people, merciful. Even if you are concerned with having a clear conscience, and others think that maybe you're a prude, pure in heart. Even if you are always trying to pacify others and care more about diffusing conflict than any other objective, peacemaker. Even if your convictions and actions get you into constant trouble with those who set the rules, persecuted. Even those things, right? Jesus says, you are blessed in the kingdom of heaven. You're blessed. Even if you're dealing with that stuff. No matter where, deep sorrow. In need of God's comfort. Because you can't, the idea of poverty of spirit, this being poor in spirit, means you got nothing. And it's the only place you can go. You're like a beggar saying, I need help. Even if you're there. Even if you're one of the unblessable, we consider unblessable. In the kingdom of heaven, Jesus says, you're blessed because you are going to be living in relationship to me. It doesn't matter about your circumstances. Hopeless or hapless. Despised by world standards. Successful or unsuccessful. Significant or insignificant. Qualified or unqualified. From the point of view of the world. In the kingdom of heaven, Jesus says, you're extremely fortunate. You're well off. You're truly happy. That's what Jesus is saying. Why? Because it's in a relationship with Him. In His kingdom. And what Jesus does in the kingdom of heaven, this relationship with Him, turns every world value upside down. The kingdom of heaven turns every concept that the world has and turns it on its head. And everything that we think is so great and the world says is great, ain't so great in the kingdom of heaven. But here's the thing. In the kingdom of heaven, the standards change now. Right? It ain't about us. Right? It's not about us, it's about Him and our relationship to Him. So everything that's sinful or fallen or corrupt, everything in this world that world applauses, the rich, the powerful, the worthy ones, they too can be redeemed. Their sinful nature changed. And changed. And while everyone in the world that says that is worthless can become blessed ones in the kingdom of heaven. Isn't that awesome? We cannot, as disciples, live the blessed life in the kingdom apart from Jesus. We can't live it. We're living, yes, between this present evil age and the age to come, and we're seeking to live and begin to learn as a disciple of Jesus. But it can't be done. We cannot be true disciples apart from Him in His kingdom. Someone has defined grace like this. Grace is the ability to live a life that we could not live left to ourselves apart from Jesus. Let me say that again. Grace is the ability to live a life that we could not live left to ourselves apart from Jesus. That's grace. We all know grace. We know grace. If you've come to Jesus and you say, yeah, ask for forgiveness, you know that you cannot save yourself. We've talked about that. Can't save ourselves. That's called unmerited favor. There's nothing you can do to earn it or get it, right? That's grace. But what does grace do? Grace in our life from God is the ability and power to live a different life that we couldn't do. We couldn't live that life without His grace. We couldn't live differently. We couldn't do it on our own. We can't change. And how many of you tried? And we can't do it. That's the first beatitude, isn't it? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You see, it is possible by the word of Jesus, no matter what the circumstance is in the kingdom of heaven, we can be extremely fortunate, well off, and truly happy. And that only comes in Jesus. What it says to me, and what I'm trying to learn myself, and that is, there's a lot of things that I try to control in life. Are you that type of person? You just want to control things, and you get upset, and you get worried. You might get worried, or your health comes along and it has trouble with your health, and you start worrying, and you try to get better. Okay, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to get better, and get over it. You see? And there's a lot of things in life. So what happens when I try to control things? When I think I can control things? I get angry, frustrated. Have any of those feelings? Embittered. Because all I'm trying to do is control it. And that's a life without God's grace. God's grace is the ability to live a life that we could not live by ourselves. It's in relationship with Him. So it's not a matter of seeking control over stuff in my life. It's a matter of yielding to Him. Yielding to His lordship. The King of the kingdom. That's what it's about. Now, I really believe that the Apostle Paul learned this principle. And he shared it with the Philippians. I'll find it in a second here. Philippians. Now, remind you, Paul is writing this from prison. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you have lacked opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I've learned to be content whatever the circumstance. I know what it is to be in need. And I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Whether well-fed or hungry. Whether living with plenty or in want. I can do all things through Him who gives me strength. That attitude in which Paul has in expressing here is the attitude of the kingdom in relationship to Jesus. So that the circumstances and the stuff of our life, our health, or whatever you want to put out there, that we find the rest He promised in the middle of it. I was reading the other day, and the author was saying, well, how do you know whether you have the peace of God? You say, well, things are going really well. How do I know that I have the blessing of God in my life? How do I know I'm living my life really in relationship to Him? And he was saying, hey, the only way that you know whether you really have the peace of God in your heart, in your life, is when things get out of control and you're still peaceful in the middle of it. That's when you know whether the peace of God or God has changed the heart. And it's all about being a disciple, about being a learner to Jesus, who is the teacher. Paul was able to get there in relationship to Jesus in his life, and he's writing that from prison. And he's saying, I've learned a secret to be content. What's that? I can do all things through Him who gives me strength. Whether I've got a lot or don't have a lot, whether I'm in prison or out of prison, okay? You can fill a blank. Whether I'm successful or unsuccessful. Whether I'm happy or hapless. You see, that doesn't matter. Because the bottom line is the foundation, right? The relationship with Jesus in the kingdom. And He's called us to live there. And it's possible. Do you believe that? It's possible to get there as you grow in relationship to the Lord? Because if you don't think it's possible, there's no way, that you're even going to try and build on the relationship you already have. Right? We're called to grow. In the Lord and His kingdom. We are and can be extremely fortunate and well off and truly happy in Jesus. In Jesus. And seeking to live the kingdom life in this present evil age. Let's look to the Lord together in prayer. And I invite you to come forward during this time and lift a prayer for George.